Are you curious about bodies, pleasure, and possibilities? And what about curious about what others are up to on the planet when it comes to pleasure, sex, and play? Have you considered what pleasure can do for your life, your body, and your bank account? Do you know something magical, delightful, and out of this world orgasmic is not only possible for you, but totally available to you? If you're ready to be the magical, sexual, sexy beast you know you can be, and you just need the tools to get there, you're in the right place. Now, here's the host of The Pleasure Zone, sensual movement artist, relationship and sex alchemist, Milica Jelenic.
Welcome, my sweet, sweet pleasure seekers. Guess what? We're having a show today. It's Christmas. How awesome is that? And you still get to have a Pleasure Zone show, like pleasure on Christmas. How fantastic is that? I don't know if Mary had pleasure on Christmas. I mean, she gave birth, so that could have been fun for her. It might not have been fun for her. Who knows? We don't know, do we? We can't say we weren't there. But we are going to be talking about love, the gift of love. And I have a special guest here whose whole motto in life is to live better, love better, and lead better. So we're going to be talking about the love better part of this. And I've got my guest, Matthew Brackett. For those of you who are really new to this show and you haven't seen Matthew on here, he has been a guest on before. And for those of you who don't know who he is and what he's done in the world, I'll give you a little brief on that. So Matthew was born the 10th of 13 children. I know, what an amazing mother. In a small town in New England. Matthew has enjoyed broad international intercultural experience in leadership, educational, and consulting roles in Italy, Ireland, England, Colombia, Chile, and Mexico, as well as having been a special staff officer and chaplain in the United States Navy, serving both the sailors and the Marines. He has a really, actually, that's a really brief, right, kind of description of what Matthew has done in his life. Like, we're talking years and years of dedication. So also Matthew is certified as a professional certified coach, certified speaker of the John Maxwell leadership team. And he's completed specialized postgraduate degrees in spiritual theology, human development from the universities in Rome and Italy, specialized in studies, counseling, family, and education at Los Andes University in Chile, and a master's degree in the psychology of leadership from Pennsylvania State University. Matthew has like letters and things after his name that probably some of you have never even heard of. So he's got an M.A. and M.P.S. You know, he's got letters. And
That's right.
got a lot of letters after your name.
Well, it's
so Matthew,
so good to be here yet again.
I'm so grateful that you came on and that you had time for this, because I know you're super busy and you've been doing all kinds of speaking, and I see like you're off and you're doing more speaking events in the next little while, like traveling the world, jumping around, educating people, sharing your wisdom and your kindness and all of that with the world. So that's really cool.
You're very kind.
When I first invited you back on the show,
yes.
I wanted to talk about something naughty, but we're not going to do that yet.
That's right. Christmas is not time to talk about naughty. It's about being naughty or nice.
That's right. So we're going to talk about love and the gift of love.
Yes.
And it's a really broad topic. So when they kind of approached you on this topic, you were like, hey, that's really broad. So what were some of the first things that kind of jumped out at you when I said, let's talk about the gift of love?
Thank you, Milica. Again, thank you for the opportunity. And for your audience, the other episode that we had together was about integrating faith and sex. So anyone wants to go back to that. When you brought this topic up, a few things hit me. First of all, the word gift, because we're in the Christmas season, and it's a time where we all celebrate gift giving. Now, in Christian tradition, I don't know how much you want to get into faith, but anyways, in a lot of Christian tradition, it goes back to Christmas, in that God gave himself to us as a gift. So that's sort of where it comes from. And so that's the whole thing about gift is we as human beings, we are gifts for one another. And to live as gifts for one another is, I think, it sounds very beautiful. It's not easy to do. It's a challenge, but I think that's something so rich in the human condition that we have the ability as human beings to choose to live as a gift for the other. And I'm not only referring to our spouses or our significant others. or our partners. I'm referring to anyone, that we can live as a gift for others. Now, that's the only thing that I have control over, is how I show up as a gift for others. I can't determine or control how other people show up for me. But I think there's something so fascinating and beautiful of the human person. And we marvel at it when we read about it, when we see movies about it, when we hear stories about it, how people can be so giving and so generous. So it's something so beautiful in the human spirit. And I think and humanity has always been through difficulties and challenges. So I'm not one to say that we are in the most complex and difficult times ever. No, it's not true. But every social moment has its challenges. And I think we are challenged in a lot of ways as human beings to live as gifts for others. And so that was one thing, gift giving. And the greatest gift that we can give others really is ourselves, is our love, our care, our kindness. And we can give all kinds of wrapped presents at Christmas, but they lose meaning when they're not backed up by this genuine gift of ourselves. And they gain so much meaning. In other words, they're a symbol of something deeper when it's backed up by a person who lives as a gift for the other. So that's one thing that came to mind, the word gift, and then love, which is, again, one of the greatest things that we can do as human beings. And there's a lot that we could talk about love. Love, yes, there's an emotional side to love, but I think there's also, when we, philosophically, with that, love is also a choice. In other words, love is something that I decide to do, even when I might not feel like it. Now, we as human beings, we appreciate when the emotion is supportive of what we have, how we want to love, right? When we have the emotional backdrop, it's easier to love. It feels better. But love, the real love, it's a choice. And if we go back to some of the philosophers the way they define love is the will the good of the other, to want the good of the other. Now that's very broad, right? And then as you would know, well, it's being the expert that you are, if we go back to the Greek word, there's like 4 different words in Greek around the different types of love. Because I think in English we use love for everything. I love a hamburger, and I love an animal, and I love a person, right? But love, they have the family love. There's a storge, which is a Greek word for sort of the love between family members, which is a protective love. There's philia, which is that friendly type of love. There's the eros, which is the erotic love. There's then the agape, which is the highest type of love, which is sort of unconditional, that choice, that sacrificial love. And I'm going to go on a tangent here about sacrifice. So as you can see, a lot of things came to me as you brought up this topic. But anyway, sacrifice is a word that I think as human beings, and in English, we have a hard time with, because it has sort of a negative tone to it, negative connotation, but at the same time, very heroic connotation to it. And I think sacrifice, if we go back to the Latin, it's a very positive word, because it comes from sacro facere, sacro meaning sacred, holy, or important, right? And then facere meaning to make. So to make something holy, sacred, important to me. So really, that's my priorities, the people that are important to me. So when something is important to me, the way I say it is the steps that I take to achieve that goal or to maintain that as a priority, those are sacrifices. Yes, we have to give certain things up in order to make something important to us, whether that be a thing or a goal, or in this case, we're talking about people. And so there's a very positive backdrop to that word sacrifice. So that's going back to agape, which is the highest form of love from the Greek, is that unconditional. It's that love that is a choice. It's that sacrificial love. And that's something that we admire in human beings. So that's some of the things that came to me when you brought up the gift of love.
I love that you brought up the Greek meanings of love before I even asked you about it, because I was gonna that was like, so I was walking around the house today, I'm like, we could talk about the Greek meanings of love. Well, you just brought them all up. Before we came on, I was watching I think it was like a TikTok or an Instagram, and there was a little girl, she was maybe 5 years old, and she was being interviewed about love. And somebody asked her, what is love? And I was like, how cool is this timing? And the little girl said that love is kindness, and when you're thinking about other people, that's love. And I was like, oh, that's like the sweetest thing in the world. And then they asked her, like, how do you know if somebody loves you? And she actually kind of like went into a little bit deeper about her perceptions of how you know when somebody loves you is that you feel like safe around them and you feel happy around them. And I was like, wow, because these are things in my life that I know that I've had, like with my parents. They have very different ways of showing love. So for me, growing up, love was very confusing. I still to this day, I find love very elusive and very abstract. And I'm like, I don't even really understand. Like, it's a very big concept, right? And to try and explain something like agape, how do you explain God's love? Like, we try and put words in it, unconditional love. We try to explain that. And I don't think that we even have, we don't have the language. I don't even know if we're at a level of consciousness that we can really get it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think love is incredibly elusive, but we always try and gift it, right? And we try and receive it too. And it's like, how do we know when we're receiving love? That's a question I want to ask you, is how do you know if you're receiving love from somebody?
Oh boy. Before I answer that, it's one of the greatest human topics. It's been written about, there's poems about it, so many stories, but you're right, it's so broad. But I think each person, there's the 5 love languages, but that's one aspect. There's just, everyone experiences love in different ways. Like, as you said, as a child said, when someone feels safe and secure, that's one expression of when someone feels loved. Right? So there's these sort of consequences of when love happens. There's this happiness. There's all these emotions which I think are effects of when love happens. But you're right. It's hard. It's elusive. It's hard to put your finger on what makes love, because I think it's expressed in different ways. It shows up in different ways. But we as human beings, we know when it's there.
Yeah.
We can smell it. It has a beautiful perfume, right? Aroma that we can pick up on, but it's hard to put our finger on it. How to receive love, and I think this is an important thing, because one is, love is how we care, how we give, but you're right, it's how we receive. So your question is how to receive love?
Yeah. No, I just thought I'd give you the big whopper of a question. How do we know if we're receiving it, and how do we receive it?
Right. And this will get your listeners. I won't say that I have the answer, but your listeners can think about this. I think part of love is knowing how to receive love. And this is, as human beings, we can have a hard time, because sometimes people, especially who are givers, they want to be the ones that give, and they have a hard time receiving. Whether even we just talk about receiving compliments, receiving validation, receiving affirmation, we can be like, no. But if that's how someone is loving, well, that's the gift that we can receive. It's knowing how to receive gifts, is knowing how to receive gestures of love, knowing how to receive if we go back to the love languages, if someone who likes to show you love in this or that way, to know how love is, it's a two-way street. Yeah. Not only, now it is, again, it's how I love, but we're talking about, right, how I want to give love, but now how can I receive love? It's to understand that when people are giving something, that they're doing it out of love, and it's a loving gesture to be able to receive it. I think we get that distorted sometimes, because we can reject it, and that's a contradiction, because I want to love, but then I end up rejecting someone's gestures of love. Yeah. And oftentimes it's unconscious, right? It's not intentional, but it's something that we have to pay attention to. So how to receive love, and then I think how to receive love has a lot to do with humility. If we think that, we are in the position where we're the only ones that can give love and we can't receive it, well, there's a certain distortion there. And I don't want to call it pride or arrogance or the ego, but sometimes the ego can be in the way there, where it's almost like, when it comes to love, I need to be the only one that knows how to love and that gives love, and I can't receive it. That's a distortion, and that can end up being a little bit selfish. There can be some selfish motives there, which are very unconscious. And so to kind of bring those to light, so that, no, loving is not only giving, but loving is also knowing how to receive. Yeah. That's what comes to mind when you ask that very challenging question.
It is a very challenging question, and I've watched this in my own self. I've been challenged by how to receive love, and I've had that arrogance of, I have the ability to give, so I'm going to give to you. I think I was in my 20s when I started to look at it a little differently, and I had it was actually a person who was a person living on the street, and it started off as somebody asking me for money, and I didn't have money at the time, and I was like, this is and my brain went, oh, this is really fascinating. I owe like $30,000 for like school debt, and this person has zero, and they actually have more than I do. And so I challenged myself to ask them for money back. And the guy was like surprised. and he was like, what do you mean? I said, well, right now I have negative 30,000. I owe the government. What do you owe? And he's like, zero. I'm like, so you actually have more than me. Are you willing to give to me? And it was kind of a stunned moment, but it kind of opened me up to like asking other people. And I have actually asked street people before too for money, because I do know that they have, and I've actually received it. Like, and I'll receive it from them. I'll say, I need a quarter. Do you have a quarter for like a phone call? When we needed phone calls, right. When we needed quarters for phone calls, right? And I've been given it. So then it was the challenge to receive it, right? That challenge to receive a quarter from somebody who has like zero is huge. And then I would go, okay, like I gotta like tear my heart open and be okay with this, and like take that quarter and like not feel guilty and not feel bad. Like they're gifting it to me, and I'm going to use it for what I said I was going to use it for. And then so I think sometimes too, we can look at people, we evaluate like, what do they have? What can they actually offer? But everybody has something to offer. And then the challenge, I think, is to actually learn how to receive it from them, and not, if that person gave me the quarter and I was like, no, I was just joking. Well, that would kind of tear them down.
Right.
And it's like, well, why are you screwing with me, right? It was, no, actually, thank you for that gift. I appreciate your gift, and I'm going to utilize your gift. And to me, part of love is to show people they have value. And so I like doing, it's like a weird thing I like doing is like asking random people for things to see if they'll say yes. I'm also like I've become really good at receiving no's, and then the challenge then was to also learn to receive yeses from people. And part of love to me is that willingness to be rejected. I know it sounds opposite, but I think there is like, in order to truly be able to feel loved, you also have to be able to be okay with being rejected, because sometimes you will have people separate from you and they won't love you, and you have to be able to be open enough to love them enough to let them walk away.
Right. So profound. I think it's that unconditional aspect of love, right? In other words, that we give, not looking for anything in return. And then we can also receive with that same unconditionality.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying is so that it's not tied to anything, that our giving and our receiving is not tied to anything. And that's a beautiful thing about the human ability to love. Very challenging, definitely. Something that I went through recently, as entrepreneurs, it's very challenging to get started and all that. And it's a lesson I learned recently is, sort of, I know it theoretically, but, I love doing things for people, but I have a hard time asking. And I was in a lot of financial stress. I just turned 50, so I reached out to some of my siblings and say, hey, how about a birthday
invest in me?
All right, how about a birthday present in the form of money? And my siblings, they were just they're like, hey, never be afraid to reach out and ask. But it requires sort of like this. Yeah. It requires humility, recognizing what you're going through, knowing how, but it's also giving someone else the gift to be able to give.
Yeah.
And
give you what you need, right? It's right. Like they could have just said, oh, Matthew, we're going to send you a new sweater. You're like, I don't really need a new sweater. What I need is money to pay my bills.
Right. So, I won't pay my bills. But it was giving other people the opportunity to also help, right? Again, going back to the whole selfish thing, that if we're the only ones that sort of have a dictatorship around giving, well, it's not helpful, because other people also want to have that towards us. And always to do it in a very respectful way, but to give people the opportunity.
Is a really, I think, a beautiful thing. There's that saying, it's better to give than to receive. And for me, in my brain, I always went, who the heck is receiving?
All right.
If everybody's giving, like, my brain does these things, and I like, then I question these things. I'm like, but I don't get how that works. So yeah, it's equal. It's equally important to give and receive. And
Yes.
It doesn't have to be physical things, but when you need physical things like money, to be able to have the courage to ask for it. And even in business, it's like you can have, you can be like writing invoices or something, and that can even be intimidating at times. I was kind of joking with, so Lizzie Enns is also a
right.
She's got a show on Inspired Choices Network as well, and I work with her on some things, and she laughs. She's like, I know that you struggle with invoices. I'm like, how do you know? She's like, when the invoice is really high, you will wait like 2 weeks because it's like you're afraid to ask me for money. I'm like, yeah. And she's like, just stop it. Just send the invoice. I'm like, okay. It's really funny because I'm like, I did the work, but I've had this thing where I'm like, I just want to give to you, so I don't know how to ask for. And my husband laughs. He's like, I need to make you a t-shirt that says money up front, because you will do things for people forever and not ask for money. I'm like, you're right. So it's kind of like this ongoing joke that it's something for me that I like diligently practice, is receiving. And I find it incredibly difficult. Christine McIver, CEO of this network, will attest to that. She yells at me all the time for it. So it is something that I'm working on. And there's absolutely an arrogance that comes with, I'm the better giver, and I know I'm not. It's also the fear of receiving sometimes can get big. So maybe we'll talk a little bit about that too. Maybe there's the fear of giving, like if I give too much, will there be nothing left? If I receive too much, will people find me greedy? Something like that. So we're going to go to our first commercial break, a little bit late, but we're going to do it anyway. So for those of you listening, we'll be right back. You're listening to the Pleasure Zone here on Inspired Choices Network, and we'll be right back after this commercial.
Are you secretly a voyeur, wondering what's going on in other people's sex lives? What if now is the time for a totally different sexual evolution? Are you interested in people who are pioneers of different sexual and pleasurable practices? Lean in now with Milica Jelenic, where she will entice you and your body to know your own pleasure zone. On the Pleasure Zone radio show with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic, you'll receive tools, inspiration, and a foundation to allow yourself to receive more in your sex life, and quite possibly other areas of your life as well. Listen for the Pleasure Zone with Milica every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and 5 p.m. Pacific Time on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com.
Are you a subject matter expert? Are you here to share your expertise with an audience waiting to hear from you in only the way you can deliver? Are you ready to have your voice amplified across the airwaves? Inspired Choices Network has a global radio platform streaming to millions of people across the world. Professionally produced and supported by an accomplished team every step of the way, you can broadcast from anywhere in the world, knowing your voice matters, and we ensure it is delivered with ease and efficiency. Eager to hear your message, the world awaits. Contact us today to become an Inspired Choices Network radio host. Email become a host at inspiredchoicesnetwork.com.
This is the Pleasure Zone with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic. To participate in the program today, join our live studio audience in our chat room at inspiredchoicesnetwork.com. You can also make the choice to ask or comment by email, info@milicajelenic.com. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back, my sweet pleasure seekers. For those of you who are listening, it is Merry Christmas to all of you. we are celebrating the Christmas show with a little topic called The Gift of Love with my guest, Matthew Brackett, who his whole way of life is to live better, love better, and lead better. So what better person to talk about the gift of love than Matthew, who this is like his thing in life. And I love that. So we've been talking about, in the last segment, we were talking a little bit about the Greek meanings of love. What is it like to receive love? What are all these scary things about love, and how do we receive it, and how do we give it, and how do we know if we're doing this? And I do think that there is an energy that sometimes comes with fear, both with like giving too much, like how do I know if I'm giving too much love, or how do I know if that person's going to reject me? There is this element with love that there's going to be the opposition to it, which is kind of like rejection. And well, I think the opposite of love can be many things. The opposite of love can be fear, it can be hate, it can be so many things. So when we have love, then we often will probably have the counterbalance energy to it of, I have this fear that I might lack love, or that I might never have love, or that I might, all those other things. So let's talk a little bit about some of those oppositional energies that might stop us from really knowing love. I'm just throwing all the challenges out to you today, Matthew.
This is so fascinating, because as human beings, we live in this tension. And I think that's probably where I would start, is this great ability, as we've talked about, to love. But there's also that tension toward the ego, which we would call selfishness. But there's a healthy side to that. So it's like, in other words, how do I protect myself? How do I establish the proper boundaries? Because when we talk about these extremes, we have someone that can be a giver, that can give, but can lose respect for themselves in that giving. In other words, burn themselves out, set themselves up for a lot of betrayal and rejection or abuse of that love. Right? So someone who gives a lot then can be walked over, right? Stepped on. And so again, we're talking about extremes here. As we know, virtue is always in the middle. And so understanding these pulls that we have this pull to love, but we also have this internal pull to protect ourselves. And it's important just to pay attention to that. And I think intentionality is always important, to pay attention to why do I do what I do? Am I doing it to fill a void? Am I doing it for affirmation, for validation? Sort of like this ongoing thirst that is never quenched to be affirmed and validated. That's in other terms, that's what we would call an aspect of codependency. Mm-hmm. So these are all these things that we, as human beings, we try to keep in check, and it's very challenging because we're pulled in all these directions. There's a lot of unconscious motives to what we do. Sometimes there's more other motives that are more conscious, but we don't really label them or know where they're coming from. So those are some things that come to mind as we're pulled in all these directions. And so I would encourage people to understand, when I love, why do I do what I do? And when that love is not being respected, or is being rejected, or is being sort of stomped on, do I know how to pull back in an appropriate manner that is respectful towards myself and really respectful towards the dignity of love and the dignity of the other person? Because that's when we can become enablers. When we just sort of let people walk all over us, well, we're really not loving them in the end, because love it's not a soft word.
No,
it's a very strong and hard word, and challenging. And when we love someone, we also want to lift them up. And sometimes that means that we need to establish better boundaries. We need to step away, even though that's what we could call hard love, right? It could be misunderstood and misinterpreted. How we do it is very important. Again, but we can control how the other person interprets it. We can control our messaging and do our best in doing that. Anyways, so much there. So many.
There is.
the directions that we're pulled in as human beings. Did I answer your question?
You did, yeah. And I think we really have and sometimes we can have all these things going on simultaneously. We can have the fear, we can have the love, and it can all happen simultaneously. And then when we don't take that moment to step back and find out what our motivations are, like what are we feeling and why are we feeling this? And when we don't take that moment we end up getting into sometimes old cycles that are in old patterns that might bring us into the same situations where we're not really healing and receiving more love. What we're doing is we're just maybe out of desperation trying to cling, like that codependency that you were mentioning, trying to cling to something that isn't necessarily going to elevate us. And I like that word you were using, elevate, because it is about elevating us into a different awareness, a different consciousness, a different level of love, like all of these things that we I think as human beings, that's part of the target, is to elevate ourselves, to become better people, right? In general, I would hope that's part of the target in general, but I don't know, that's not everybody's target, but that I think is anybody who's got that as a target is going to look to be able to take that moment to be more of an observer. I think can help also with love too, when you can sit back and observe people and you can see, like, you know, what are they actually saying? Are they saying that they need space? Are they saying that, and to hear people and to know that when they are, what they are saying is often exactly how they feel. Because a lot of times, so when I work with couples, I do have a lot of people who are always trying to, like, and you work with couples as well. I don't know if you find this too, but people try and reinterpret what each other says. And sometimes it's like, they just said what they said. That's exactly what they said. It's okay that that's how they feel. So sometimes we try to reinterpret to make things more comfortable for ourselves. And if somebody in terms of like the way that we give love, if somebody's saying to you that they love you, are you okay with believing that? Because I've also had, you know, people go, well, they say they love me, but they don't do A, B, C, and D. Okay, well, then the conversation is really about how do we integrate those things that you require that help you feel loved? How do we integrate that? Rather than saying you're not loved. And I recently worked with a couple locally, and it was really, really cute because they've been together for years. And I had given the lady like one phrase to say that was different. And then she went home and used it. And she came back the next week and she's like, how did that work? I'm like, because you actually told your partner what you feel and you weren't in the place of judgment. So one of the sentences that she was using is, he's just getting so fat and he won't look after himself. And I'm like, so what are you afraid of? Well, I'm afraid he's going to die. I said, so the truth is that you actually dearly love him and you want him to look after himself so that he can live longer and you guys can have a happy life together. And she was like, yeah. I said, then tell him that.
Right.
And she was like, oh. I said, yeah. So there, it's like, sometimes you do need to reinterpret, but the truth was there was love behind it. It was just a lot of frustration built up. And then sometimes we say things. So yeah, she ended up doing that. And I haven't seen her for 2 weeks. She's off having happiness. So it's great.
Oh,
So I love that. I love when those things show up. So when you are loving somebody, get down to the root of it. I think sometimes that's an issue too, right? Is we don't get down to the root of what we really feel. Like the lady saying, like, he's lost himself. Well, what are you really worried about there? What are you seeing? Do you feel like they don't love themselves? Like, what's going on? So when you're working with couples or even people in general, because you've worked with a lot of people who probably have had through your life, had a lot of love issues, relationship issues. What are some of the things you've come across that you find are things that there may be some, I find that's like an ongoing theme, that people are like, they'll say things that are kind of mean, but that's not actually what they mean. Right. And there's something underneath it. So do you find that there's a similar trend, or are you finding something else going on?
No, definitely. I think, and when I talk about communication, whether it be with people that I work with in leadership coaching, also in couples, it's sort of, what message do I want the person to hear?
Yeah.
And I start there. I say, what do you want them to hear? Well, I want them to hear this and this. Okay, well, how can you package that in the way that that's what they're going to hear? Because oftentimes we let ourselves take pulled, you know, whether it be frustration or whatever it is, impulses, then we say something, and the message that's coming across is very different than what we want them to hear. Like that example that you give of the woman. Right? Yeah. So it's like so you went deeper. So, well, what do you want them to hear? Why is this so important to you? Well, because I want them to know that I love them and I want them to live longer. And well, then that's, how can I package that message so that that's what they hear, and that they're not hearing these other things. Now, in relationships, you know, in romantic and committed loving relationships, what happens is there's a lot of history. So there can be a lot of hurt. And so we speak oftentimes from hurt. We speak from our wounds, we speak from our past experiences, and therefore from assumptions. And so we become a bit incredulous about what others say, or become cynical towards what others say, like, oh, what's behind what they're saying? I can't really, and then they try to be nice, and then we become cynical of that too. And so you sort of think you can never win. And so and that's the hard thing, because there's a lot of baggage there, or history. And so it's sort of, we need to purify that, because we're not doing justice to the other and to our relationship when we filter or view everything through those lenses and filters of the past.
So what are some of the ways that you suggest people do use to like purify the past so that they can receive more love from their partners? Do you have any tips that come to mind?
Oh boy, that's hard. Well, it depends what the past is like.
Yeah.
I mean, like what you do, what I do, I really think in third-party interventions. In other words, having a facilitator in the conversation, because it's new eyes, fresh eyes that don't have all those filters and baggage, and they can take things at face value. And this means two things. When we bring a third party in to our relationship, it means, first of all, that we want to improve. It shows that we're not content where we're at, and we want to be better in both parts. And so that's huge. And secondly, you're inviting someone into that sacred space, which is an intimate space, which is your relationship. And that's something that you and I, none of us ever take lightly. And it's a very sacred, holy space to be. And it's a very vulnerable space. But when you bring someone in, it really offers a lot more objectivity. And a facilitator facilitates conversations that otherwise might not happen. And you sort of facilitate and guide the conversations so that each party has time to talk, each party has time to listen, and then you're able to say what I'm hearing. Because everyone, they're hearing through their assumptions and interpretations and their filters, and we as facilitators aren't, because we don't have all that history with them. And so what I'm hearing, and so we sort of purify the message in that would be the first thing that comes to mind as a way to get beyond that. Sometimes a couple, just as human beings, sometimes there's a lot of things that we can't do on our own. And as a couple, there's certain things that you can't do on your own as a couple. And so we all need support. And why is this important to us? You tell me when we need to break. But this is important as human beings, when we have experiences, emotions, thoughts, and all this, when we transform them into words, that's how we process things. And that's why we need someone else, because like in this relationship, I'm a mystery to myself in some way. So I get to know myself through the eyes of Milica. And that's how it happens in couples. That's what happens also in the coaching relationship. We all need another human being, and that's sort of like a mirror or a window through which I can see myself. And this is how we are as human beings, and how we process when we transform things that are internal into words. We take more ownership; they become more real. Now, in some couples dynamics, they're unable to do that because things escalate really quick, and so that healthy process gets truncated or distorted very quickly. And so therefore it's not fruitful. That's why a facilitator can be very helpful in that, because that each couple, each part of that relationship can hear the other say things in a new way and not react and not escalate, and just allow them to say it, and then learn how to listen in new ways. I think this is so powerful. But it's hard for us, again, because that tension, we're very self-protective. I don't want to need help. I don't want to be in a position where I need help. So that we get that ego that's pulling on us, but we also have this other aspect that as human beings, as social beings, we need help. We can't get places on our own. And so it's learning to do that.
We're not on the planet by ourselves. I don't know if any of you guys realize that, but there's more than one person. And it's kind of a weird thing that the setup is that we actually all need each other. So in some way or another. So having somebody facilitate is helpful.
It is. And Milica, since we're talking about Christmas and just, children and birth and all that, if we look at creation or just nature, no element of creation survives on its own.
Never. No.
It's all interdependent. And really the most, if I were to use the word, I don't like to use this word referring to human beings, but the most useless creature, right, or a dependent creature for a long period of time is a human baby.
Yeah.
And there's a great lesson there for us as human beings, that yes, we need each other from day one of conception, right? And then we, and as a baby, and then when we get old again, we go back to that same dynamic of great interdependence and dependence.
Absolutely.
I'm not referring to the diapers, right? But but yes, we all need each other when we get to that older age, and that's also very challenging for us. But
I'm seeing that in my dad, actually. My dad's 85, and he is having a lot of resistance to receiving, which is really fun to watch. And then he said to me the other day, my dad's got a very thick Serbian accent. I don't know why, but you changed my life this year. You changed my life. And I'm like, okay, Dad, I changed your life. How? He's like, I don't know, but you changed my life. And now I'm happier. I'm like, I don't know why, but I am. I'm like, okay, Dad. So he has a huge challenge in receiving. My dad is like super arrogant about gifting, has always been. And he would like, even if somebody who was a multimillionaire handed him money, he would, I don't need it.
right.
But he's actually finally like surrendered and softened to let me step in and like help him do some things. And it's and I can actually see how that reflects in his health. So the more he's able to receive from me, the better his health is. He's getting more, like he was almost not even functional to like walk a few months ago, and the more he's been receiving from me, he called me this morning, he's like, I'm going for a walk. I'm like, good for you. My dad lives 3 hours away, so it's not like I could chase him down the road. I'm like, good for you, Dad, go for a walk. Just so you know, I didn't fall down the stairs. I'm going for a walk. Okay, Dad, have fun. So it's kind of funny to watch as somebody softens. And my dad is like a really big example of that in my life, is like to watch how somebody softens to be able to receive, and how that actually reflects not just in their happiness, but also their body translates that too, and shows you how that receiving of love and receiving of whatever it happens to be can actually be this amazing contribution to your entire being in your life. And spiritually, it does things for you as well. So we will get back to this, because we have only done one commercial break. We're going to do number 2, and
Right.
we won't have a third this time, but that's all good. So we're going to head to our next commercial break. You're listening to The Pleasure Zone here on Inspired Choices Network, and we'll be right back after this commercial.
Are you secretly a voyeur, wondering what's going on in other people's sex lives? What if now is the time for a totally different sexual evolution? Are you interested in people who are pioneers of different sexual and pleasurable practices? Lean in now with Milica Jelenic, where she will entice you and your body to know your own pleasure zone. On the Pleasure Zone radio show with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic, you'll receive tools, inspiration, and a foundation to allow yourself to receive more in your sex life, and quite possibly other areas of your life as well. Listen for The Pleasure Zone with Milica every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and 5 p.m. Pacific Time on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. This is The Pleasure Zone with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic. To participate in the program today, join our live studio audience in our chat room at InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. You can also make the choice to ask or comment by email, info@MilicaJelenic.com. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back, my sweet pleasure seekers. Today we are talking about the gift of love with Matthew Brackett. And I have to say, I'm like really proud of myself. I haven't blushed once, and I haven't turned into like a little giddy child, because for those of you who don't know, I have like a massive crush on Matthew Brackett. So this is like really, really like hard for me, but I'm like maintaining composure, and I'm really proud of myself right now. So, for me.
Doing great, Milica.
So for those of you who are listening and you're wondering about love, what is love? I know that there are, when we look at love, even from the Greek explanations, I also think of love. There is in I think it's in the Bhagavad Gita, but don't quote me on this. But there is this description between love and lust, and that lust is something that we have that's more based on our like carnal nature, desire for somebody, almost like an ownership of somebody, and that true love is like the agape love from Greek, right? It's more of that open love that is very non-judgmental. It's like that ultimate God love, actually. So there's that love. And so I think when we look at love and we look at the gift of love, is to also have that question in mind, like, is this love or is this lust? Like, what am I feeling for this person? I say that because I just mentioned that I have a crush, and like, what the heck are crushes? Are they love? Are they lust? Are they admiration? What are they? But there's so many things, right? So to explore that, because I think we don't really, I think a lot of people define love nowadays in a way that is actually what lust is.
Wow, you're so deep and profound, Milica. I just throw nuggets. I don't watch your show often, so maybe this is just the way you show up every day.
This is how I show up, yeah. So, I dive into different angles, but that's funny.
But again, we're talking about these tensions in the human being, right? And I think in love, it's also, for a really healthy love, it's also important to have a healthy relationship with oneself. A stable, secure, sort of solidified self-love, which is not selfishness, right? It's just a very strong sense of who one is and who one's worth is. There's a phrase that I like to use: is only when you are at home with yourself are you ready to welcome someone into your home.
Yep, that's a great phrase.
You can quote me on that.
And that's, yeah.
And it's based on, sometimes that we look for relationships to fill a void. And again, we're not doing justice to the other person, because we're expecting sort of the impossible. You have to fill the voids in my life. Now, there is a completion that happens in relationships, but that having a strong self is very important. And when you talk about love and lust, also there's a lot of talk about love, and I think I would agree with that. I think it's a very selfish perspective of love, and being confused with, in this case, what you're saying, it's lust, because I love in as much as it's good for me and as I benefit. And that's a contradiction to really what love is. Now, of course, we can benefit, right? In true love, especially when it goes both ways. That's a piece of heaven when that happens. But there's a big focus now on self. And so, and my emotional well-being, and that I get whatever I need out of it and out of something. And no, and you're right, there's a very subtle selfishness there, or lust, when it's really all about my pleasure. It's all about me. It's all about my satisfaction. And so I think that's a distortion, definitely, of what love is. And Absolutely. That's, and since we're in the pleasure zone, well, let's talk about sexual intimacy, right?
Let's, Matthew.
Sexual intimacy is one of those greatest moments of expression of the gift of love, of where in a couple, where they give themselves to each other in a very unique and very physical, but also, hopefully it's not just physical, but it's also emotional. It's also psychological and spiritual. There's this bonding of two human people where they in that embrace, that loving embrace. Now, in sexual intimacy, there can also, some of the lust and selfishness can also come into play, right? Where it's one part is only looking for themselves and the other part can feel used or just as an instrument of pleasure. But now when this goes both ways, then it becomes sort of, there's a mutual understanding and we're loving each other, we're serving each other, we're giving ourselves to each other, we're looking for the good of the other. And when that happens in sexual intimacy, well, it's a very beautiful thing because each person feels treasured, loved, valued, and all of that.
And I think to add to that, right? So yeah, the love, the treasured, the valued, just like in receiving love when it's even non-sexual and how that can impact your life. Receiving love when you've added that sexual intimacy, it can heal dynamically. It can actually heal your body dynamically. So for those of you with chronic conditions out there, you can actually use your sexual intimacy with your partner if you have a partner that's very loving to you. If you think of it this way, if somebody touches you with love and they put your hand on you and they have kindness and love, your body responds to that and it will respond and it will probably begin to feel better. So if you can do that in the most intimate and vulnerable way, your body can heal. So to not just take it to the level of, yes, this is lovely and low. There are levels that you can elevate your sexual experience to have love and all the healing that comes with it, as my hands just want to go in all these directions. It goes everywhere. So you can have an experience that is very different than what you see in pornography, very different than what you've read about in textbooks. It's something that I think maybe Eastern tradition talks about it a lot with things like Tantra and those kind of experiences where your body is having both a physical, emotional, spiritual experience, and there's transformation that happens. And so all of that's completely possible. I know it's possible, but I've experienced it. So I know that's something that is available on the planet. So we can receive on an incredibly intimate, deep level that I think a lot of us crave that and we seek it. And we're seeking it in ways but we're not being fulfilled, right? So we're seeking it in ways which could be like, oh, I need this deep fulfillment. I'm going to go eat some candy. I need this deep fulfillment, so I'm going to go smoke some drugs. I need this deep fulfillment, so I'm going to go have sex with strangers or whatever. We're looking for deep fulfillment, but we're not finding the right resources to fill it. Like you were saying, that emptiness, when we have to be able to bring that wholeness of ourselves to somebody. And then there's completion, which is different than when you're empty and you're trying to fill a void. So we need to be able to have that and bring that to each other. And then you can have dynamic interactions that you probably never even knew were possible.
Definitely. Milica.
Just bringing that up for a second.
And you're right. As human beings, we look for all these things to sort of fill the void, but then we begin to realize it's not doing it. And I think, and that just, when we, in sexuality and sexual relations, when we detach just the sexuality, the sexual intimacy from all these other aspects of who we are as human beings, well, it's not going to satisfy the way, it might satisfy in one way, in a very passing way. But when it's integrated into who we are as human beings in all elements, and in that bond of love, it's so bonding, it's so uniting, it's so fulfilling. Again, it's a little slice of heaven on earth.
Absolutely. So we've got about 2 minutes left of the show, and what I would love is for you to let people know how to get a hold of you and who are the kind of people you're looking to work with. If you can just give us a brief on that.
Of course, Milica. Let's see. I do a lot of leadership work, and love fits into that because I say leadership is love and love is leadership. When we talk about leading as influence. And when I talk, my approach to leadership is what I would call a holistic approach. So it's how I lead myself, how I lead in my intimate circles, and that's where relationship coaching fits in. And then in parenting and things like that. And then how I lead professionally and in organizational contexts. So really it's people who are influential, who consider themselves very influential in their lives, but they want to influence in a positive way in their romantic relationship a lot better. Maybe they've hit some rough spots. They want to see each other better. They want to hear better, and they want to love better in their romantic relationships. So people like that are willing, that want to invest, that really believe that their relationship will work and they want to make it work. Those are the type of people that I work with. But one of the things is also they have to be willing to work on themselves. In other
Yeah.
words, that they're not pointing the finger that if you fix my spouse or partner, but rather that they're willing to take ownership of, I'm going to do my part to make, because my relationship will be good as I am as good as I am.
That's
in this.
cute. I wanted to say thank you, Matthew, for coming on. We have 1 second left.
Thank you for listening to The Pleasure Zone
It's New Year.
with sensual movement artist
Happy-
Milica Jelenic.
Merry Christmas, Happy
The
New Year.
Pleasure Zone returns next Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Mountain, and 5 p.m. Pacific on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. We hope you'll join us. Until then, have the best week of your life by choosing to be turned on and tuned in to your body.